How'd you like to listen to .NET Rocks with no ads? Easy. Become a patron. For just $5 a month, you get access to a private RSS feed where all the shows have no ads. $20 a month will get you that and a special .NET Rocks patron mug. Sign up now at patreon.netrocks.com. Hey, welcome back to .NET Rocks. I'm Carl Franklin.
And I'm Richard Campbell.
And man, it's been a while since we've done a show.
We've done a studio show. We recorded a bunch in Copenhagen, which was fun.
Right.
And we're going to be in Porto not long from now recording a bunch more. But this is like the in-between the two. We get one studio show. And you're in your studio.
I'm in my new studio, yes.
That's cool.
Yeah,
how is it? Are you
take a look. I mean, it
seems familiar.
It's exactly what you think, because you've been in the old ones, so the walls are.
You kept the red wall look.
It's the same fabric. It's not the same bolts of fabric because obviously I bought new ones.
Time has gone by,
but it's the same stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The insulation behind the fabric is rock wool.
Yep.
And on the outside walls, before we did rock wool, we did spray foam insulation.
Nice.
So it's actually insulated to R50. If anybody knows in construction, that's really, really tight.
Yeah, this means you could heat the place with a 60-watt light bulb, if those things still existed.
And I'll move my head so you can see that split HVAC unit.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to work very hard.
No. That's great. I'm in my space up on the coast. So this is my office is still not assembled. I've been away a fair bit, but I've got enough running here to at least run the portable rig, but this will eventually be the setting.
Yep.
As we get stuff set up. It's good to be, change is afoot.
Yeah. And I'm sure that my microphone sounds tighter, in other words, less echoey than it was even in my old place.
Without a doubt.
Which I just had U-Haul blankets up on the walls,
Yeah.
This is like serious.
Yeah, really properly proofed. I was thinking I would probably get a few real traps in here because it is a Gyprock box.
Yeah.
But,
you know what? I have the stuff.
Yeah.
I have the insulation and the material and the glue. I could send it to you.
Ethan Weiner is a genius, though. A couple of real traps in the corner of this room would probably go pretty flat.
It probably would, yep.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start off with something cool for Better Know Framework.
Awesome.
All
right, man. What do you got?
You've heard of Jeff Fritz, right?
Yeah.
I'm laughing because he's an old friend of ours.
Yeah.
Well,
all I think is purple sequins. I'm thinking purple sequins.
Purple sequins, purple goatee. Yeah. He is working at Microsoft and he's evangelizing for the Blazor team. He's doing live coding. And that's his job is to just, be in touch with the community over Blazor. So he and I started this new weekly thing called the Blazor Puzzle.
Oh, nice.
And if you go to blazorpuzzle.com, you'll see all the ones that we've done so far. So here's the premise. And they're only like 15 minutes long.
So they're nuggets.
Nuggets, yes. But they're definitely nuggets that you can participate in and win coffee mugs and stuff. So we show you some code that doesn't work, some Blazor thing. Why doesn't it work? And then people send in their answers to Blazor Puzzle at AppVNext, and we pick from all of the correct answers. We pick one at random. That person gets a puzzle mug, a T-shirt, or a T-shirt. We're not sure yet. And then we basically, show the solution. And then we do a new puzzle for next week.
Nice.
Yeah, it's simple. And it's fun.
Cool.
So BlazorPuzzle, yeah.
And just getting people, aware of what's out there.
That's right. I mean, if you don't want to sit through a lot of training, hours of Blazor Train or even anything that's on YouTube or whatever, you can just have some fun and learn little bits and pieces.
I love it. And make it digestible, just a little bit at a time.
Yeah, make it fun.
Cool.
If you've got Google, you could probably do pretty well. And we also have a Blazor Puzzle talk in the upcoming .NET Conf.
That's awesome.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, .NET Conf coming up in November. So yeah, it'll be great that you're in that.
Yep.
Cool one, dude. Congratulations. You know, in sort of a related topic area, I shot a video series with the Visual Studio team called Tea and Technology, because it couldn't be coffee and code. I don't drink coffee.
Tea.
But yeah, I got to go run around and talk to a bunch of the Visual Studio leadership folks, or not just leadership, but like the engineers doing the thing. Of course, I talked to Mads Christensen and Leslie Richardson, James Montemagno, and wrapped up with Amanda Silver.
Wow, that's so cool.
And just a sort of reminder, you know, digging into all the great things that are happening in studio. You know, it seems like people have forgotten how good our IDEs are. Mm-hmm. You know, it's easy to play with the new tools and different approaches to things. It's like, you know why we like IDEs? Because they rock.
They rock. They work. They make you more productive.
And so it was really great to dig into the various products in the stack. Like, you forget how good the debugger is. And, you know, and those kinds of things. It was really fun to do that series. So I'll include a link in the show notes. But yeah, Tea and Technology of the Visual Studio miniseries.
Excellent. All right. Well, that's what I got. Who's talking to us, Richard?
Grabbed a comment of show 1759, and that was the show we did with our friend Mark Seaman back in 2021 about code that fits in your head. And the name on it is Ye Dev Text, but I'm pretty sure it's not Kanye. I'm just saying. Kanye, if you do listen to the show, interesting. But no, I'm pretty sure it's not. Anyway, Ye Dev Text has a bit of a rant, and I read it because I could so relate to it too. He said, because we said something casual like, get someone to look at your code. Mm-hmm. I think I found the line where the bug exists. I just couldn't get a single person to look at the code I'm working on to save my life. The reality is that zero higher-ups could care less about the quality of code. They only care if it works. Then they tell you to move on and put out the next fire.
Right.
This is from the point of view of someone who makes internal code. I have an old web app that I'm being asked to save, and none of it fits in my head. Remember? Code that fits in your head? Over time, I have learned the value of making code that fits in your head because I myself in earlier years followed mentorship that didn't care about quality or readability of code. They only care about performance and more that it was if it worked or not. Zero care about craftsmanship. As I tried to push for basic automated testing and as I tried to even learn how to make code more readable or maintainable, I got labeled as the guy who just likes to write a lot of code and that I made things too complex. No one noticed I was trying to figure out how to go this route of making code that would fit in someone's head. They even told me no one cared how my code looked as long as it worked. The internal web app has as many God methods that don't fit in your head, but the web app kind of works, so it's considered good. Also, don't tell me to change where I work. I have medical stuff that runs in my family, and this employer is willing to be lenient on my leaves, so I'm stuck. Or rather, you choose to be stuck because you get some benefits to make it worthwhile.
Yeah.
I used to want to learn so much, but that fire has just about been put out. Now I do what I can, but slowly I will bend my own opinions and feelings about should be done versus just get it done. Experience has made it so that I can write bad code that looks bad on my part and undermines me personality. But hey, thanks for the therapy session. That was a great episode. I don't know, it's kind of a downer, but at the same time, it's like, you know, it's hard to do good when there's just no reinforcement for it at all.
Yeah.
You know, although it really, I think Yi, and I'm pretty sure his name's not Yi, it's really about code you can live with too, because you're probably going to have to read it again as well. Like, don't make your own life miserable. But I'm with you. You're not going to get any support from your team about that. And I understand why you want to stay. You know, you're taking care of the things that are important to you. And that doesn't mean you get to spend a lot of time on craftsmanship.
Yeah.
But hey, let me send you a copy of Music to Code By. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Code By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on the Facebooks. We publish every show there. And if you comment there and I read in the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Code By.
And you can definitely follow us on Twitter or X or whatever the hell it's called today. But the real fun is happening over on Mastodon. I'm at Carl Franklin at techhub.social.
And I'm at Rich Campbell at mastodon.social.
Send us a toot. We like toots.
Yeah, some good conversations going on over there, I gotta say.
Definitely more focused, I think.
People are there for intentionally. It's not just debris.
Right. Yeah. So let me introduce again, bring him back to the show, Egil Hansen. He's a Dane chilling in Iceland. and a developer at Delegate and a Microsoft MVP. He chats globally at conferences about nifty developer stuff and is all about that clean, maintainable code. He's the creator behind bUnit for Blazor tests and AngleSharp.diffing. Think spot the HTML difference in C#. Though he's danced to many tech tunes, Egil's current jam is everything.NET and cloud. And yes, this bio was written by ChatGPT.
Oh no, it's everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I had to do something, right? I had a very long bio and very serious one on that, right? So put it in there and say, make it funny. And this was what came out with a few adjustments.
It's not bad at all.
Well, welcome back.
Yeah. Hey, how's bUnit?
bUnit is doing okay. And by the way, just to comment on that.
Comment from Yi?
Mm-hmm. Comment from Yi, yeah. I am a big fan of that book. What Mark Seaman wrote. We read that at the company actually as sort of a book club thing, and it's completely agree with that. I think the biggest problem in that regard is we as developers need to learn to speak a language that management will understand, so that we are allowed to actually write good maintainable code, because it does actually pay in the long run. There's lots of literature supporting that.
And I guess that's one of the challenges there is finding a way to convince to see the value in quality code. But I'm empathizing with Yi. I mean, it's a hard fight, and he's also got things to deal with. I mean, obviously some challenges at home that his employer is supporting. Like these don't sound like bad people.
No.
Right? They're taking care of each other. They just have a different set of priorities because they don't see the value.
Yeah.
I got to tell you that I use bUnit in my Blazor classes that I teach online. Awesome. Yeah. I did a Blazor train on unit testing, and we use bUnit. So I'm really, really curious as to what's new in bUnit.
So curiously, we haven't had to do a lot of changes. So I guess we started around 2019 when I sort of started prototyping and building it, and think mostly due to Steven Sanderson's brilliant architecture around Blazor, that because we are sort of leveraging the low-level bits in Blazor, those haven't really changed a lot.
Right.
So the core render engine, core rendering parts of Blazor have stayed the same more or less since then.
Yeah, because if the underlying platform had shifted on you, you'd be in the middle of a big rewrite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but we do have a yearly cadence where we have to do at least a small point release of bUnit, because there's a new .NET release, and we want to support that.
This is a big one, isn't it? I mean, this one changes things.
Well, and surprisingly, it doesn't really write, because the Blazor renderer is still the same. What it's doing now is it's allowing you to render things on the server, and instead of sending weird bits and bobs down to the client using Signalara or just generating everything using WASM on the client, it's generating HTML and sending that if you're using the streaming rendering and the server-side rendering things. Yeah. But that is all layered on top of the core fundamentals of Blazor. So we haven't actually had to do anything extra to support that, which is super nice. So some of the things we are working on, me and my co-maintainer, Steven Giselle, is more related to things we want to do for V2. So, looking back, it's always fun to sit and just seeing that it's been 4 years now, and some of the things I would have done different since then would probably be to remember the good old Yagni principle. You ain't gonna need it. And so I kind of made some design decisions, and we are stuck with them, at least as long as we stay with V1, because we don't want to break people, right?
Right.
Even though I think most, if not all, of bUnit's users are not really using any of the parts that we could want to break. But things like, because of this design we talked about with Blazor, that it supports basically, it can spit out everything. There was the Blazor mobile bindings at one point, which might become a thing, and I think Steven had a demo where he generated Flutter components or Flutter code from from Blazor. So I decided to architect bUnit such that there's a core part that doesn't care what is the output of your components, if it's HTML or something else, and then there's a web part. And that additional abstraction is there and it's working, but it's not being used. So that's sort of a layer we've added.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it really is a classic example of you ain't gonna need it, because I thought it might be useful at some point, and 4 years later, we just have additional abstractions to maintain that we had to work around. But one thing that we have been ironing out during the last year and a half has been stability. So there have been some edge cases you could get into where you render a component that does something maybe asynchronous, and you sort of have to get the timing right in your test to wait for that thing. And we'd seen some interesting behaviors. For example, we had one user that was able to, granted with a very large component tree he was rendering during a test, like with thousands of components that was being rendered in a single test, could cause a Stack Overflow. And we spent a lot of time, and I even actually got on a call with the entire Blazor team asking for some input on that problem, to really chase down and see if there's anywhere in the code base on the Blazor side of things that isn't sort of thread safe, or has any surprising things. And the annoying thing was, actually, it turned out after a lot of investigation, what happened was that when a test run is over, a test is finished, it will dispose of the bUnit test context, which is sort of the whole host for setting up a test, right, and running and rendering a Blazor component and passing in parameters and services to it. So typically, what you do if you are a good, .NET developer is that when you have something that implements iDisposable, you dispose of that when you're done with it. So typically,
that's the polite thing to do.
Exactly, right? So what happened is that we would, when the test was over and the test had actually passed its assertions, so when the test method is exiting, it will typically go ahead and dispose of the bUnit test context, which would then dispose of the bUnit renderer. But in cases like this, where you have a huge component tree, and some components might still be doing work, they might still be rendering, they might have timers and other things going on inside them that would cause them to be in the process of a rendering at the time where the test was finished running, and would dispose of itself, and that would dispose of the Blazor renderer, which is like the core component that is driving everything Blazor. And
each test?
Yeah, well, and that is completely fine. That's actually what we want. The problem was, we hadn't really thought about that as a problem, because we said, well, when we're disposing, we don't care about the state of the component tree. But because things were still going on when we disposed of the renderer, the component tree that the components are generating sort of got into an invalid state, and all of a sudden it was possible to have cycles in the component tree which would cause a Stack Overflow. And it was a thing that only happened obviously when you were running on a slow CI server up in the clouds, and super hard to reproduce, and it only happened when we were running together with other tests and things like that. So yeah, I've grown wary of disposables and really also protecting the state of things after a dispose method has been called. So that was a fun one to track down.
Yes. I mean, what I like about this story is, like, clearly people are pushing bUnit to places you'd never imagined. Like, that's the best compliment you can make a piece of software, is I took it to somewhere it had never been before, and we found some things.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I remember back, you mentioned C# Fridge. I used to jump on Twitch and hunt around for people that was using bUnit back in 2000 and 2019, 2020, because I wanted to see how they were using it. And it's a fun experience watching people using your framework and seeing them start heading down that rosy golden path that you laid out for them, where they will land in the pit of success, and all of a sudden they take a right turn right over the cliff, and you're like, what? And I should have probably put some guardrails up on there, and so I think building bUnit has been a massively fun and interesting thing. Also, just learning about API design and being able to learning to design something where people will land in that pit of success, right? And intuitively they will get to when they try something, that is probably what happens is probably what they wanted.
Right.
So,
when did you add snapshot testing to bUnit? Because when I did my Blazor training with Simon Cowell, we used bUnit, and then he introduced his snapshot testing framework. And so, was it in there then, or did you add that afterwards?
So I initially prototyped something back before V1. And I actually talked a lot with Simon. He's a fantastic open source developer as well. And his library, you're talking about Verify, which is sort of a foundational library. And then he has a whole bunch of plugins on top of that understands HTML or Blazor or, I don't know, Entity Framework. He has a whole bunch of extensions that basically allows you to do snapshot testing. And so we prototyped a bit on something that would be embedded directly in your Blazor test components. But at some point, I decided that it wasn't really worth to have it be built directly into bUnit, and instead, point over to Simon's verify.blazor test library, which uses bUnit under the hood.
Right.
So I guess the answer is I never really did. We tried a little bit, but then decided just use whatever he has, because there's a whole bunch of edge cases that it will handle for you.
Okay, but there is snapshot tests in bUnit. I've used them.
That was sort of part of the initial before V1. It's kind of been in an I don't really support it phase since then.
I just used it last month. Has it been taken out since?
No, we just stopped using it.
Don't advertise it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So if you go to bUnit.dev to read the documentation there, we basically say use Verify. And I do remember you also. I saw that Blazor train with you where you had Simon on, and I do believe you. I got that feeling that you had some good arguments why actually his model was better than the one we were trying to do.
Well, it's different, right? I mean,
it's different, yeah.
Yeah. Snapshot testing basically says, take a snapshot of it, and when anything changes, fail the test.
Snapshot of the output.
Yeah. The output. Exactly. Here's the input, here are the parameters, here's the output, and if anything changes, fail the test, and you can say, no, I meant to do that or not. Yeah.
We do have something now in bUnit that is definitely supported and implemented through the AngleSharp diffing library, which was building AngleSharp diffing was a detour I took from bUnit for a couple of months, because I wanted a way to semantically compare two sets of markup, like the one you expect, kind of like snapshot testing. So you define, this is what I expect, and then you have whatever was produced by the component. But I wanted a semantic comparer that understood HTML and understand that the order of attributes on an element doesn't matter. So that shouldn't fail the test if you refactor your component to order the attributes differently, or the order of classes in the class attribute, or even whitespace. Whitespace is, for the most part, insignificant, at least if you have two or more spaces next to each other, right? So that is definitely still there, and that is, if you don't want to go the verify route with snapshots testing and snapshots being separate from the component test you're writing, we have the markup matches method, and it works really well if you have, for example, smaller snapshots that you can just inline. And actually, that is my preferred method. So you write a test for a component, and then you get to your assertion step. You say, my component, and then you do markup matches, and then you pass in the markup that should be there.
Yeah.
And if you write your bUnit tests in Razor files, so you're actually writing them in Razor files, you can actually use markup inline in your C# code, which means you don't have to escape quotes and things like that. And you get IntelliSense and you get syntax highlighting for HTML directly in your C# code. So that is actually also, if you go and look at bUnit.dev, the documentation site right now, that is the way we recommend doing it now, because the Razor editor experience in Visual Studio and in Writer have become much better than it was originally. So it actually works quite well now.
Now, what about if you're using code behind? Will it still work there in a C# class?
It will, and it's become a lot easier to work with C# 11, where you got wrong string literals, so you can do triple quotes, and then you can have some markup. And then in the markup parts, it would still be a string, but at least you don't have to escape all the quotes and inlining and all of that. So it's very good there as well.
What's funny is back when I was doing VBNet and I was excited about VBNet.
It's a while ago.
It was a while ago, but they came out with these XML literals where you could define XML right in there, and we were all like, yeah, C#, you don't have that. And C# programmers like, why would I need that? I don't need that.
Oh, I remember being jealous of VB developers back in the 2000s when you still had to work with XML on a regular basis. That was a super nice feature. I think we've opened up a bit more to having markup and code mixed together in the recent years. I think maybe React sort of led the charge with that with JSX, right? And saying, hey, it might not be a bad idea to just mix concerns a bit more, right?
Right. It's okay to mix concerns just a little bit.
C# developers got a little less dogmatic, I think.
Yeah, for the better, I think.
I think so too.
Now, are you talking about MADs? Is that what you're saying?
No.
No, I wouldn't blame him for that. I think it's a general movement in the community. But Mass has definitely also the interesting parts of the changes that have been to C# the last 10 years or so, where they've gone from... I remember talking to Anders Heilsberg back when he just introduced TypeScript. And I asked, that nullable annotations where you can say that this might be null, might not be there. Are we getting that in C#? And he was like, being a bit secretive and say, maybe. And the history around that was that originally they didn't want to put something into the language where the compiler could come into a situation where it couldn't give a yes or no answer. It should always be right. With nullables, you might have a null here, but we don't know necessarily in all cases. Right. That's why we have the bang operator and we have the
question mark.
Yeah, exactly. So
I like the way that John Skeet calls it the damn it operator.
yeah. That's a better name for it.
Like, damn it, I mean it. Yeah. Trust me, stupid compiler.
Just do it. Do it.
Just do what I say.
So the language group definitely have loosened a bit up and allowed more. We are not entirely sure, and allowed the compiler to actually be wrong in a few instances. And I think that's for the better.
Yeah, this is Boolean thinking, right? There's yes and there's no, but there's no maybe. Come on.
What is that?
What's that? What maybe? And gentlemen, I need to interrupt for a moment for this very important message. And we're back. It's .NET Rocks. I'm Richard Campbell. That's Carl Franklin.
Hey.
Each in our respective studios for one studio show before we go back to the in-person live shows at conferences.
Yeah.
And we're here with Egil Hansen talking a bit about the latest in bUnit and all the goodness. I also wanted to bring up the whole open source conversation because obviously it's been an ongoing thread for us the past couple of years.
Sure has, yeah.
And you strike me as a person leading an open source project that helps you with your work that other people are now depending on as well. I don't imagine there's any commercialization in your future around this at all. Am I wrong?
No, not really. No. So I think the whole MOQ drama, I guess, let's call it that.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Yeah.
I really didn't want to jump on that because I felt like everybody, you're only amplifying rage. Like it wasn't necessarily a good thing. Everybody backed off pretty quickly. I
agree. I try to take a laid back approach and not be too aggressive, but it's hard to be quiet. But I think it certainly wasn't fun for Daniel, the maintainer of MOQ, but I thought it brought a lot of interesting conversations to the front in the .NET ecosystem, in the open source ecosystem at least. And I also adjusted my thoughts a bit on what it means to have maintainable open source. So one of the things I did realize was there is a surprising imbalance in the relationship between the consumers of open source and the maintainers of open source.
True.
And I don't think it applies to all open source models. So we have the corporate open, I don't know if that's the right term, but bear with me, like the corporate open source models from like where companies like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, the Linux Foundation, they hire people that work full time on open source. Like in the big projects we know and like that drive a lot of things that we have take for granted, like the Linux kernel or the .NET or Java or
C#,
all of that.
Exactly.
So I assume there is a business model in it for those big corporations because they are, stock driven. They wouldn't be doing that unless there was something in it for them. So in that regard, I sort of consider that a somewhat balanced model. The consumers get the safety of knowing there's big companies behind the open source, so they can safely take a dependency on that. And Microsoft and the likes probably get something out of that as well. I think, and then there's the second model, which is sort of maybe where you have open source that is some sort of that's a dual license, for example, attached to it, or there is a company behind it that is selling services. And I think we have examples of in-service bus with Egil Hansen's company and Duende Software, the identity server. There's actually quite a lot of success stories around that, where people have had some open source product that made sense to lift up to create a company around in some way. And
obviously we had those conversations on the show for that matter. And they said, our customers came at us and said, hey, we want to pay you so that we have certain rights.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So that again, there is a balance, right? They give money, and in return, they get certain guarantees, support, SLA, and software, right? But the third model is where I see the imbalance. And there might be fourth and fifth models as well. But that is sort of maybe the open source model where bUnit fits into and MOQ also fits into, even though MOQ probably has 100 times the downloads that we do.
Or throw AutoMapper into that equation if I'm following you, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the idea here is it might be a lone developer that's creating something that is becoming quite popular and being used in many places. MOQ is an excellent example of that. Like, imagine how many projects, commercial projects that are depending on MOQ to be able to iterate, deploy a new version, because it's part of the testing pipeline. So if for some reason or another MOQ ceased to exist or wasn't pushed out anymore, or as it were, people started to think, can I trust this? Can I have this in my pipeline anymore? Well, there's lots of millions and millions of dollars and lines of code invested in MOQ. And when you think about it, the surprising thing to me is that the imbalance between the consumer and the maintainer here is that it's actually even though the consumers are getting MOQ and the likes for free,
right?
They also have a huge disadvantage because they have no leverage. There's nothing that is basically forcing them into the maintainer that is to keep maintaining that product.
Yeah. No, it's that great line when they're yelling at the maintainer. It's like, would you like me to refund everything you paid?
Exactly, yeah.
But I really appreciate what you're saying here, right, Egil, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's like...
No, go ahead, yeah.
We are treating all of these projects the same, and they're clearly not. If Microsoft, you can rage as an issue in the C# GitHub repository, and a set of full-time employees are going to read that. That make real salaries and share allocations and all that sort of thing, right? Or even if you do the same thing in Duende and you're a paying customer, like that's another thing. But for Egil or Jimmy or Daniel, like, come on.
Right.
Yeah. And I saw some people suggest to Daniel, instead of trying to bring awareness by you can agree or disagree with his tactic, but basically he was trying to raise a flag and say, hey, I would like to work more on this, but I don't have the time, which is money, to actually do that. And I want to keep moving forward with MOQ. A lot of people were suggesting, well, instead of doing what you're doing, you should instead maybe create a company, create a dual license and have a pro version. I think there's a problem with that because certain projects like MOQ and bUnit for that matter they have periods where you really can do you can work full time for a couple of months, maybe even a year on that. But then there is a lot of downtime where it doesn't really make sense to build a company around something like that. And then there's the thing, like I said, you guys probably know that you created companies, right? So it's not a trivial thing to actually have a proper company incorporated with taxes and selling and VAT and sitting across countries.
You got to be making money, otherwise it's not worth it.
Yeah, there's an overhead to operating all of that. It's also a different skill set. Like, just because you're good at building testing tools doesn't mean you're good at building testing tool companies. It's not the same thing.
And I can see why somebody like Daniel, at least certainly, I wouldn't want to try to attempt that. Because it's sort of my comfort zone. So right now, I think the open source system in open source in general is lacking a way for developers to do what they do best and then have other people maybe make a platform that can make it sustainable if that is a need. I think the best example we have of that is actually might be the App Store concept that we have for mobile apps, right? Because then their basement developer can just put out an app and register his credit card with Apple or Google, and if people actually want to buy, and they sort of become the reseller of the software if they want to attach a license.
And you minimize the company part of that overhead. You could be a quote unquote sole proprietor, and I'm using business terms here, and just have money appear and pay your taxes, but a heck of a lot simpler.
Yeah, so that would be one way that it could, in theory, go, but I'm not sure that it's a viable option.
No, and again, this is why it keeps coming up on the show, is that, and I think you've articulated super well, that the tech giants getting involved increased the sense of the schism, right? And now we're surfacing more and more and saying, shouldn't we have categories, and shouldn't there be a mechanism to support these different models? So I think this is not done yet. Definitely not a finished. So there aren't perfect solutions yet. We're progressing.
I do want to give a lot of credit to GitHub because they've been pushing things with the GitHub Sponsors program, and they've been doing things recently where you, as a company, if you have a GitHub organization, you can go in and say, "Give me a list of all the open source software I depend on," and you can prioritize those, and you can upload a CSV file and say, "I want to sponsor all of these." So that lowers the barrier for corporations to come, for companies to come in and say, they can have, I don't know, $100 or $500 every month they want to give out, and they just base that on what they're actually using.
What they're using.
So I definitely think that is also another approach that could be that it make it dead easy, so there's no excuse. Like it should be a one-click, like the one-click shop button from Amazon just for sponsoring all the open source you use, right?
And we talked about this on the show a while back, and I may have called my friend Martin Woodward in the meantime, and we were talking about exactly that the average CFO wants to pay attention to this once a year or once a quarter and no more. And so can GitHub roll all that up? Plus, I would throw on top of that basic, hey, what open source do we depend on? That's bill of materials stuff too, right? Like that represents your security exposure. Like these are things that a corporate customer that uses GitHub in a meaningful way should be paying for because they're very valuable. And while they're at it, putting some money into the projects that are important to the company by utilization alone, if nothing by preference, just makes sense. Like, it's not like we can't afford it, and it's not like we don't get value. What you got to do is reduce the friction.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I think the best way to ensure that the open source software that people are depending on in their software sticks around is, I don't know any better way than actually, giving the maintainers a little bit of money. That is, I can say I've been very lucky to have some sponsors throughout the years. That it does actually, even though it's not quit your job money, it's a boost to motivation for the long nights where you actually have to sit and debug a Stack Overflow.
Thanks. I like that, right? Quit your job money is a different ball of wax, but we acknowledge you with take your family out to dinner, like that kind of thing. I like everything about that. Or get yourself a new monitor, right? Like that's respectful and beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So we touched on bUnit in .NET 8, and that, yes, there's a major Blazor update, to the architecture, and now we don't have to have a SignalR connection for anything that just runs on the server, which is great. But what do you personally think about .NET 8 in terms of its significance in the whole ASP.NET Core ecosystem?
Good question. I think it's going to have a significant impact on the adoption of Blazor, or rather Blazor components.
Yeah.
Because I do think it is a superior model of using Blazor components instead of Razor pages or MVC controllers if you want to go really old school to model your application in such a way. So I do think that it will become a gateway drug to many that can actually just use it to create classic old static website. Well, not static websites, but just websites, right? Not web applications, but you can use it to actually build websites now. And it's a much more intuitive and forgiving development model.
And it's not that let's not create a Blazor app. We're creating an ASP.NET Core app. Oh, and we have this component model that we can use to generate data now that just happens to be called Blazor.
Some might even say it looks a bit like web forms, just in a modern setting. Oh,
listen to you.
Oh, yeah. Well, there are certain... Well, if
as
you take
easy as.
Yeah, Well, I think web forms was a brilliant technology for its time, right?
Without a doubt. And certainly there's a certain customer that familiarity will encourage them.
Sure.
To at least look at this. That was one of the other aspects I thought about this is another checklist item where you don't know if you want to commit to client or server side rendering, and you don't have to decide.
That's right. And you can use a combination of both. I am so looking forward to RC2 or just the release in November. RC1 kind of has a little speed bump in it for using, client-side rendering and auto rendering. You have to sort of put those things in a separate Razor class library right now, but it's only temporary. But I cannot wait. I have so many websites that I don't have interactivity. I just want to generate stuff and not give my users the white screen of death when the SignalR service.
Not that ever happens.
Bonks.
No, but yeah, actually, that was the biggest sort of gotcha with Blazor Server, which is also in and of itself a fairly good product, especially for internal intranet, not high-scale websites. That kind of grayed out. We lost connection, counting up to 8, right, before it gives up. So the only thing I can really fault the new development model for is going to be a performance. It is a bit more expensive to basically spin up the whole Blazor renderer and spit out HTML compared to the more, there's less things going on if you just do Razor pages or even MVC just spitting out some HTML, right?
And of course, the claim to fame for .NET 8 is speed, but this is a particular set of libraries where they're adding functionality, so maybe we don't automatically get faster all the time.
It's really funny that I spun up RC1 and I'm messing with it, right? And I'm like, all right, I'm just going to do static stuff. And then I just have this little button on blazortrain.com that sorts ascending, right? It's like one button with a little bit of code. And I'm like, oh, geez, now I got to do a Blazor server or Blazor WebAssembly or auto. I can't do that because of the current state of it. It's like, nah, I just want to write some JavaScript. What am I thinking? Oh my God. Did I just say that? Did I just think that?
Oh, no. Well, Carl, you can just do, that button could just be a link that if you click that, it posts back to the server with, query parameter.
True, I know.
Yeah. But you sort of get into that thinking, it has to be a stateful thing, right? It actually doesn't, which is a nice thing.
Yeah.
But again, from the performance point of view, it's not a problem for 99% of the apps out there. If you're building a new Bing, you might not want to do it with Razor, or rather Blazor component, right? But if you don't have 1 million visitors every day, that's probably not. You probably want to prefer maintainability over a slight bump in performance, right?
Well, and this really was just a hiccup in the current version, right? Once it's done, I would have just set, render mode to auto, and by the time anybody gets down to flipping that, sort of sending button, everything would have been in WebAssembly anyway. So I just can't wait for it.
I agree. I think
it's going to go to town.
It's going to. I suspect there will be a a few more customers in my boutique as well now with bUnit, because it's actually bUnit is even more ideal in this scenario, because if you're just doing server-side rendered stuff, you don't have a lot of JavaScript in there, and that is the biggest limitation of bUnit compared to something like Playwright, is that it doesn't run in a browser. So all the JavaScript that you might be calling from your Blazor components, it stops sort of at the JS runtime interface, and then you have to intercept that and deal with that in bUnit. So, but if you're just generating HTML and making a server-side application, you don't typically have a lot of JavaScript, if any at all. And then bUnit is going to be a really excellent choice for testing your components in that case.
So, Egil, is there anything else that you want to talk about before we wrap it up? Yes.
Well, how about we talk about maybe the most controversial new API in .NET 8, and it has even been backported to .NET 2, .NET Standard 2.0, and that would be the time provider API. So if you don't know what that is, it's basically an abstraction over the datetime offset, get UTC now, that we all use in all our code, and it also includes an abstraction over timers. So time that things that happens in reoccurrence, and it also allows you to do things with timestamps, right? So it's all about a single abstraction that encompasses all of those things. And I thought it was a really interesting API, and that was designed during .NET 8. It actually started all the way back in 2020, and it's a proposal that have gone, I think, to 350 plus comments on GitHub in that issue related to it. And it was super interesting because there was a lot of objections. So people didn't like the name, a time provider. People thought maybe it should do less things. People were throwing, single responsibility principle and solid principles into the discussion, and I kind of understand why the objections. So for me, the interesting thing started was actually last year. I needed a way to deal with timers and date times in some product I was building for a customer, and we wanted to basically be able to test that code as a fairly complex state machine kind of a thing that did things, based on clocks and things like that. So I ended up building something quite similar to Time Provider. As it typically is when you like to build open source, you proudly announce it to the world and push it to NuGet, and somebody points at the issue on GitHub and says, "Have you seen this?" And I was like, But it was fun, actually. I took a look, and I could sort of immediately recognize why it was designed like that, because while my design was similar and it wasn't as thought through as the one that the Microsoft team has proposed, but I could immediately recognize the design and why they came to it, why it came to be what it is, right? And to sort of in defense of all the people that are sort of challenging the design in that GitHub issue, I would probably have been on their side as well if I hadn't actually spent a month trying to sort of go down that same path myself.
That's such a great statement. Like the more I knew, the more I appreciated what a problem they were taking on.
So I think why I think this is interesting is that if you are using time, like a timestamp or a datetime offset or a timer in your application, which I think most of us are, you probably want to switch to using the time provider API going forward. And it is available in 7 and 6 and all the way to back to .NET Framework, actually via the .NET Standard compatibility. So the key thing about the time provider and why it isn't a bad design in my mind is that it's not an abstraction over just time and date. So we've seen, you probably have written some of those in your code bases, the iClock interface that has a get UTC now or UTC now property on it that would allow you to replace the iClock with a fake or mock during testing, right? What it is actually, a time provider, is not just that. It's an abstraction over the flow of time or the progress of time. So to be able to abstract flow of time, you need to start with the concept of a timer. So, can I quiz you guys? So,
sure.
The new general timer provider in .NET 8 and backported back is called iTimer. And what is the promise, not of that, but in general, what is the promise of a timer in .NET?
That it will fire an elapsed event or an event that you can handle on an interval.
Exactly.
Until you say stop.
Yeah. And to be more precise, if you, for example, create a new timer and say, in 1 second, call my callback, the promise is that the runtime will call that callback in 1 second or later. Unless the process crashes, of course, and it never calls. But it's in 1 second or later. So if the operating system is doing stuff as busy and you can't get any processor time, well, it might not be in 1 second, it might be later. You don't really know. There's no guarantees. So if imagine now that you create a timer and you want to control that timer, maybe during testing. Well, to keep that promise, if that timer callback, for example, checks, when the timer callback happens, it goes and checks, what is the clock now? Because it might be relevant to it for it to know if it actually, had to wait 1 second or it took a bit longer, right? So it's quite typical, actually. You would, if you start looking at your code, you will see it's quite often that after a timer callback happens, you tend to check what the clock is, or you tend to check a stopwatch, how much time has elapsed, right? So the promise, the reason why it's sort of abstraction over the flow of time or the progress of time is that when the timer happens, the clock that you would get when you call get UTC now should also match the time that has progressed. So that means that the flow of time is tied heavily tightly coupled to what the time is as well. And that is why it makes sense to couple these things together, the concept of a timer and what the time is right now, or what the timestamp would give you in terms of if you call get time. So for people not familiar with the time provider, there's a get UTC now method, there's a create timer method, and there's a get timestamp method, which is basically the foundational building blocks. And what the .NET team then did, which was brilliantly from insight from their point of a brilliant insight they had was, well, as long as I have a timer, I can now use time providers to control things like task.delay, because task.delay is just a timer with a single recurrence. I can use things, it can be compatible with things like the periodic timer type. It can be compatible with cancellation tokens that need to cancel after a certain amount of time. It can be compatible with the wait async method. So all of those methods from .NET 8, and some of them have been backported to .NET 6 and lower, now takes a time provider as input as well, so that in your code, if you rely on timers in some way, you can inject the time provider in your production code and use that. And when you want to test that thing, you can now instead inject a fake time provider that will allow you to forward time immediately.
Wow.
Egil, I think you just did a better know framework.
Absolutely.
Oh, no.
You want another job that you can't get paid for?
No, Carl, I can't fill your shoes. But it's
oh, yeah, you can.
But this is awesome.
Next time
I totally get it. Your explanation was phenomenal.
Yeah. Spot on.
It's really interesting. And so an advice for people listening, though, is you can, because time provider is an abstract type. It's not it's not an interface. And many people are also advocating, let's get an interface. It's going to make it easier for us to, mock during testing. But it is just an abstract class, and you can actually easily mock that using MOQ or InSubstitute or whatever you want your favorite thing to be. But I would highly advise not to do that, because unless you're sort of in the most simple scenarios, being able to uphold that iTimer promise of when time moves forward for the timer and the callback happens, time for all the other properties should also be matching whatever has happened there. That is a fairly complex thing to configure in a general purpose mocking framework. And so Microsoft has also built, the official fake time provider that you can use during testing, which has method like advance or get UTC now that allows you to move time forward. And I had the sort of good experience of being able to contribute to that fake time provider with my, what I learned by building my own and sort of various edge cases that needed to be handled there. So that was a fun. That was a fun thing to really do. So as a side gig from bUnit, as it were.
Awesome.
Yeah. So what's next? What's in your inbox?
Well, I'll be heading to NDC Porto and hopefully have a beer with you guys, or whiskey, if that's still a thing. And doing
at least a port.
Yes. Oh, well, yeah, definitely. And well, we will continue working on V2 of bUnit, me and my co-maintainer. And I also have the privilege of doing a talk at .NET Conf, and then I'll be at ERDEV in Sweden, Malmö as well in this year. So conference-wise, a fairly full calendar.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah,
you're here, there, and everywhere.
So
all right,
that's me.
Well, great. Well, we'll see you there. We'll see you in Porto.
Absolutely.
And we'll see you, dear listener, next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and, of course, in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time. Got transmitter banned by the FCC.